Hello and welcome, everyone. Whether you're joining us with your morning coffee or winding down your evening, we are thrilled to have you here from every corner of the globe for Interpreting and Autism. Drop your location in the chat. Let's see how far our community reaches today. I'm Liliana Dinu, Content and Curriculum Development Specialist at Cross Cultural Communications, a leading U.S. training agency specializing in medical and community interpreting education, and I'll be your guide through today's transformative session. CCC offers both self-paced online courses and interactive live training programs. Behind the scenes, my colleague Zach is our tech wizard and chat champion today. Zach, thank you. Let's see, I'm curious about the chat. Massachusetts, Las Cruces. Wow. We've got Florida, Toronto, Colorado. That is amazing. So we're truly global today. That is what makes our profession special, isn't it? We are proud to offer full ASL interpretation today. Thank you to Madison and Jenna. To view the interpretation, click Interpretation and select American Sign Language. Now, let me share some exciting opportunities for your professional development. We have 4 incredible opportunities for you today, including one that's completely free. Zach will be dropping all the links in the chat as we go through them. Just a quick note, all times are Eastern Time. First, our free Educational Interpreter Online Primer. It's kind of like a test drive of our TEIO, the Educational Interpreter Online Program, at 0 cost. In just 30 minutes, you'll discover the essentials of school interpreting, the role, why it matters, and the law that is connected to educational interpreting. Second, our Black Friday special for all print books. Build your professional library for less with 20% off all cross-cultural communication books. Visit our website and use the code CCC Black Friday 25 at checkout. Zach will drop off the code in the chat. Third, our glossary building workshop. Register by November 25th and save $30. Work faster on every assignment with this language-neutral 4-hour workshop that teaches you to build professional glossaries with time-saving strategies and ready-to-use templates. We'll be going live December 9th and 11th, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern via Zoom. And fourth, our brand new WhatsApp interpreting exchange community. Connect with CCC staff and fellow interpreters for real-time support on terminology, ethical dilemmas, and certification prep. You can share your resources and join us for triannual coffee chats with CCC staff. Zach is posting the QR code in the chat right now. Scan it with your phone to join. Quick housekeeping. We have 90 minutes of presentation today, plus more or less 15 minutes of Q&A. So to receive CU credits, you must stay for the duration of the webinar. No exceptions. I would like you to submit your questions using the Q&A features. It makes work easier for us. Use the chat for general comments and set it to everyone to share with a group. If you want to stick around after, Zach and I will answer questions about cross-cultural communications programs and anything else related to our interpreting programs and training. For CEU certificates, they will arrive within 36 hours, more or less, at your registration email. Check spam if you don't see it. Sometimes they like hiding there. Certificates are only for live attendees and must be downloaded within 60 days. Let's meet our expert. Please welcome Katherine Langan. Katherine has worked as a translator and interpreter since 1979, starting with the Summer Institute of Linguistics in Guatemala. She's worked with Indo-European and Mayan languages, including English, Spanish, Pogomam, Quiche, Kikel, Koine Greek, and French, plus many others as a consultant. She's trained interpreters and translators and taught linguistics and Spanish at universities in the US and Guatemala. With her master's and PhD from Georgetown University, specializing in social linguistics, Katherine brings both academic expertise and real-world experience. She's passionate about language rights, language maintenance, and supporting speakers and interpreters of languages of lesser diffusion. Today, Katherine works as a freelance interpreter and translator in Des Moines, Iowa. Katherine, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Liliana. I appreciate that very much. And again, my apologies for all the interesting language names that you had to pronounce. Welcome to everyone. I was also kind of following where people are from, and it really was. I noticed Hong Kong, I think it was Bulgaria, and a couple of other places. So thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. I am going to probably be talking pretty quickly, but if it starts to go too fast, then please kind of put in either the chat or raise your hand and have Liliana or one of the hosts tell me to kind of slow down. So I will start by getting us going, see if I can get my presentation back up and running. All right. Sorry, I'm trying to get take care of where this screen is here. All right, but anyway, so just to get started with this, and again, I want to apologize to the ASL interpreters and to speakers of ASL that all of my examples are from spoken languages because I don't have the expertise to present comparable linguistic data for ASL. In terms of conflicts of interest, I have nothing to disclose. That takes care of, I think, what is the boring part of this. All right, so this content is based on lots of research. You have the bibliography, or should have the bibliography sent to you in a separate email. It's also based on conversations with providers and years of experience interpreting for autistics and their families and the providers. I'm focusing mostly on autistic children, but will reference adults as well. I also want you to know that I am focusing more on therapy and educational contexts than in medical appointments or medical situations per se, although, as we all know, the overlap between therapy and medical context can be very thin. So again, this is the overview of what we're going to do. I'm going to talk first about what autism is. Then I'm going to talk about autism and bilingualism, and then I'm going to focus on jump into the issues that occur for interpreters when we are working in autistic contexts. All right. Mostly, I am not going to read all the information on the screen. I'm going to ask you all to kind of multitask and read the content for yourselves, but pay particular attention to the highlighted words. So again, as we all probably know, autism is not like something like measles, which has a single cause and limited symptoms. There are at least 100 genes and possibly 400 genes that are associated with autism. Previously, the diagnosis of autism has included conditions like Asperger's syndrome, childhood disintegrative disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder. ASD is now a comprehensive term, and other medical or genetic conditions like Rett syndrome are considered types of clarification or specifiers for ASD. ASD is primarily found among boys, although girls have also been diagnosed with it, especially if they have Rett syndrome. For your information, this definition reflects what is published in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition from 2022. The next edition is not expected out until 2028. And
Catherine, may I stop you for just a second? We
Sure.
can see your notes. We don't see the presentation mode. I don't know if you're okay with that, or would you like to take a moment and try to switch to presentation mode on your PowerPoint?
Um, I did just, I should be in presentation mode on my PowerPoint. Let me jump out again.
Yeah, now it is. Now we can see just the presentation without your notes. Perfect.
Okay, my problem is that I can't see my notes.
Okay. Well, whatever you're comfortable with, I just wanted to make you aware of the fact that we can see your notes.
All right, you can see my screen, right, at this
Yeah.
point?
Yes.
Okay. Um, can you see my notes
Yes,
again?
we can see your notes, and that's perfectly fine with us. I just wanted to make you aware of that just in case you needed to move things around or you're okay with that.
Uh, I think I'm going to, I don't know why, because we didn't have this happen
Earlier, yeah.
earlier. So
It is also somebody
fortunate.
mentioned in the chat that it is a little bit smaller, so harder to read when you
Yeah,
add your notes.
right. And that's why I'm thinking, let me see if I can get my, I printed out a copy. So I'm going to work
Awesome.
off of that.
That is a
Uh,
great lesson for us interpreters to always have a backup plan when technology doesn't work with us or doesn't work the way we expect it to. So I will be out. Thank you, Catherine. Go on.
Thank you, Liliana, for letting me know that's what was going on. All right. All right. So again, one of the things that we need to think about with this is that again, so that these we're talking about a huge wide variation in syndromes, symptoms. But I also want to point out that the ASD, the autistic spectrum disorder, autism spectrum disorder, the ASD is actually what is used more in the area of medical literature. So this is kind of a register issue. But there's a growing preference in the autistic community to use ASC, which is the autism spectrum condition, which is based on the recognition of a wider scope of what constitutes normal. Now, during this presentation, you'll find that I waffle between ASC and ASD, and I hope that's not offensive to anyone. So again, one of the things that we're having to look at is in terms of how big of an issue is autism. And because we're interpreters, we're concerned with the world at large. And it's actually hard to kind of keep up with the statistics. While the website here says that this is from 2025, if you look at the small print below, where it says autism rate 2021 per 100,000 K people, you will notice that we're a little bit behind in terms of what the data that's been analyzed and the information that is being produced. Um, and the fact of the matter is that even this data is showing that there is a increase in the amount of autism growing around the world. Basically, what we're finding out is that autism affects around 168 million people worldwide. The World Health Organization says that 1 in 100 children worldwide are autistic, but this number may be low due to the lack of access to diagnostic centers or low levels of awareness of the condition. In the US, 1 in 36 children are autistic. That's according to the Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Network. Um, and in September, I heard a program on National Public Radio said that the current estimate is 1 in 31 children under the age of 8 are autistic. But because I was driving at the time, I didn't actually make any more, couldn't get more specific on where that information comes from. But the reality is that it is a phenomenon that is worldwide and seems to be increasing in the number of people who manifest this condition. So there are basically 3 types of areas that are diagnostic focus areas. And again, we have to remember that any factor will fall along a range from expected to or near expected to not observed when they're starting to do the analysis on this. We're going to look at each one of these 3 areas in more detail. There are resources on your bibliography. So while giving you some detail, we'll not spend lots of time on any one point. I'll leave it to you to kind of do your own homework. And it's really important to remember that we're talking about a spectrum. So there is wide variation in not only number of symptoms, but severity of manifestation of those symptoms. While we're going to look at the characteristics of autism, I wanted to start with kind of a quick look at the brain and how that it's affected. The brain is affected by autism. And so I want to point out like the amygdala. Can people see my pointer here? So here's the amygdala, this little thing right here.
We can.
Oh, great, thank you. The amygdala, it controls emotions. The hippocampus, which is over here, is the area which is critical for memory formation, navigation. The cerebellum, this little guy down here, it coordinates movement and balance and also plays a role in cognitive functions. Now, the other thing that I think is really important to keep in mind out here is that the whole area of the cerebral cortex, which is the entire outer layer of the brain. So it doesn't matter what part of the brain you're actually looking at, it is covered by the cerebral cortex, which is responsible for higher cognitive functions, including reasoning and social cognition. And again, that both of those things are areas which are in focus in terms of the evaluation for autism. Again, just in case we've forgotten, spectrum is the key word. So again, as we go through this, while I may be actually focusing on possibly more severe manifestations of autism, we have to remember that not all autistics will have all the characteristics, and the degrees and levels of each characteristic is variable. So again, we're still working on the area of understanding what autism is and how it is diagnosed. One of the first areas is, of course, that the milestones, developmental milestones, which are not met, which could be indicators for autism. This again is from the CDC. So again, please notice all the things that do not happen. All right, and all of these things are what you would expect neurotypical children to be doing at the age markers that are indicated here. So some of these are predominantly social, some are more communicative, but we all, especially as interpreters, know that relational and communicative skills are interconnected and are affected by communication delays. So again, just to point out, at 9 months, child will not respond to his or her name or show facial expression. will not, at 12 months, does not play interactive games with parents or siblings. Again, going down to 60 months, which is 5 years old, does not sing, dance, or act for their parents or for friends and family. So again, there's a lot of what we tend to refer to as delays, but could actually are manifestations that the brain is not working in the same way. In terms of social communication skills, again, there's a lot that's going on here. So I want to start with talking about the first one about avoids or does not maintain eye contact. This is almost one of the first questions that in any evaluation I've ever been in is asked from a provider to a parent. Does your child maintain eye contact? I think this is a little bit tricky because not all cultures do not have the same rules for eye contact. Of course, in Western cultures, eye contact is extremely important to indicate involvement and recognition. In other cultures, it is not necessarily so. So the interpreter may need to be able to provide information about the normative ways that the normative eye contact rules for another culture in order that this one factor does not become sort of um, a lightning strike as, ooh, this is something that we really need to be considering. So if you come from a cultural background where eye contact is not the same as it is in the US, do a little cultural intervention at that point. Um, the second one, again, this can become this will make for challenges in almost any type of situation, whether it's educational or medical. Particularly in therapy sessions, this can be very difficult since a lot of physical therapy and occupational therapy are very much hands-on. And if this is something which is a trigger for an autistic child, then again, it's as interpreters, we need to be sensitive to what's going on. Now, again, the providers will also be sensitive to this, but we need to be aware of what's happening with that. In terms of language delays, I just wanted to give you a little of one statistic basically on this. So out of 4 autistic children have mild to extreme language impairments when entering kindergarten. Okay, so 3 out of 4 will have mild to extreme language impairments by the time they're entering kindergarten. 1 out of 4 will show typical or exceptional language ability by age 5, so at the same point. So again, language is not always going to be an issue for an autistic person, but it frequently is. In terms of the fourth point here, echolalia is the technical term for this, where a child will consistently repeat a word or phrases. Now, and when we're saying words or phrases, this could also include babble. So that, again, this is one of those kinds of things that about 30% of autistic children do not acquire functional phrasal speech. But that will mean that 70% have better expressive abilities. But again, this part of this is this echolalia. It does not have to be recognizable utterances in any particular language. I worked with one kid who said, da da ti ti da, da da ti ti da, da da ti ti da, da da ti ti da was the only kind of utterance that this child did for months at a time. Eventually started to move off of that. But again, just be ready for that kind of sense of repetition, persistent repetition. And again, the last one goes back under to the idea of joint attention, which is both social and communicative. So if this is refers to sharing interest in another person or object. But it also can refer the kinds of things that will be in terms of how you share that kind of information. So um, you may get kind of just the same repetition. So, what did you eat for lunch? Response, yogurt. Do you like yogurt? Yogurt. So, again, you notice that there is no additional information being passed on. There is, again, just that repetition of a phrase that has already been given. There also may be something which sounds like we're not talking about the same kind of thing. What did you do for your birthday? Eat cake, party. Now, this kid is obviously has more expressive skills, but then the stimulus comes back. That sounds like a ball, and the response is no, party. Now, again, one of the things that we have to think about with that is that for many autistics, metaphors like that sounds like a ball will be very difficult for them to understand. So, again, it's just that the kinds of things is that you aren't going to find yourself having the same kinds of communication that you would expect from neurotypical children. The idea again of this is another kind of key factor: restricted repetitive behaviors and interests. Again, I'm going to let you kind of look through all of these. The first item is a generalized characteristic, which may cover many of the specifics which are included in the list below. The last three items reflect emotional features, which are often included with social concerns, especially if you're interpreting in an IEP. For those of you who don't necessarily work in the US, that is an individualized educational plan. So this again, all these kinds of things, the following of certain routines, obsessive interests, upset by minor changes, all these things are fairly symptomatic. And again, we need to be ready for these as we're working with these. And number 4 focuses on parts of objects. This is really quite common. I worked with a 2-year-old child who's who was focused on triangles. So if you had a bunch of shapes, the child would pick up the triangle every time. And in this particular situation, there were a number of triangles. This child also had a preference for the color red. So when the child located the red triangle, it was like almost impossible to get that child to focus on anything else other than the red triangle. And again, the child would just turn that triangle around in his hands and seem to be looking more at like the edges rather than at the plain side or the larger side of the triangle. So that is again that ties in with this whole idea of moves us back into the idea of obsessive interest. So again, these are things that frequently will get asked or will frequently get noticed, and will be asked to the parents if they have noticed these types of behaviors within children. Kind of bringing us down here into the idea of labeling the levels of autism. Again, you can tell from this slide that more is going to be coming. The historic ones of basically high and low were overly simplified, and they tend to lead to confusion and misinterpretation. Because as I've already suggested, somebody may be high functioning in some ways, but low in others. For example, they could be high in communicative, but low in sensory sensitivity. If labeled high, the real challenge and symptoms may be taken lightly. A woman named Mallory Joy Feibner, who is a neurodiversity consultant, says, and I quote, "I am not mildly autistic. I do not experience autism mildly like it is a salsa. I am often burnt out and overstimulated, but because I internalize those experiences, you experience my autism mildly," close quote. So again, it's the kinds of things that it is just overly simplified. So yay, we have newer designations. So 3 levels, again from the American Psychiatric Association, going from the ones that require the most support, which is level 3, down to level 1, which only requires some support. Um, so these new names also come from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, where a lot of detail is included. And a person can have um, it can have can be described on various levels. For example, Jennifer is autistic, but is highly verbal and requires little support most of the time. Support for her may include helping with back and forth conversations to establish friendships. Another example would be Calvin has significant support needs. He does well when he knows the routines. Support for him could include adaptive technology for communication, extra time and support when entering a new situation, access to a safe space in an environment like a classroom or the workplace. Another example of, and actually a real example of a level 1 autistic would be Jason Brooksby. For those of you who are tennis fans, he won't need any introduction. He won the American Tennis Professionals Tournament in April of 2025, and he has written on being autistic. So you can actually just Google his name, which is JenSonBrookSby, and you will find that the interview what he has written about himself and being autistic. Now, again, the reasons why these are better is that autistics themselves prefer the 3 levels. They are person-centered, and they can again it's set up so you can describe strengths as well as challenges. The other thing about this that I would like to point out is that um, while most of the providers that I work with know about the newer designation, there are still some who, when talking with parents, will talk about having high levels of autism or low levels of autism. Again, as interpreters, we need to go with what the provider is saying. I have, on the occasions where I have, at the end of a session, if I have time in a debrief, I will ask the provider about their choice of using high and low as opposed to 1, 2, and 3. And I have found that some people who have been in the profession perhaps a little bit longer may not have kept up with the newer designations. And so I have have always volunteered to send them a reference if they are interested in it, and most of them are. So again, that's just a little heads up for you. All right, so in summary, we can see that this is again, it's a developmental condition which causes significant communication, social, and behavioral challenges. Symptomology varies in severity and amount of support. It affects people everywhere. It's more frequent in boys than girls. It's actually 4 times more frequent in boys than girls. And it often coexists with other conditions. And in the US, it is most often recognized between 12 and 18 months, although it can actually be recognized earlier than that if you have like a primary care physician who's really on top of it, or if the parents are particularly concerned. I've noticed that kids can get diagnosed earlier or can get start with therapies for it, even if they're not diagnosed, if they participate in like early access educational programs. Oops, I almost forgot what I wanted to do here. I would like to find out, are there any questions at this point before we move on to our next section?
So I was able to find some questions in the Q&A. Um, One of them refers to, is synesthesia associated with autism?
Not that I know of. I mean, the foundational causes of autism seem to be more than anything else. But again, it has to do with chemical things that are happening in the child's brain, not necessarily, and how would the child get the anesthesia? Um, there definitely is no correlation with acetaminophen. Absolutely none, regardless of what Mr. Trump has tried to sell us. There's nothing in there. I mean, there's just too much evidence against that idea. but there really does not seem to be any correlation with something like anesthesia or any type of medication, at least that we know of so far.
It's synesthesia.
Oh, I'm sorry, synesthesia.
Synesthesia, yeah.
I can't answer that. I'm sorry.
Too clinical. That's what I figured. We have another question. What does it mean when a child says he has many butterflies in his head and starts acting out?
Um, Gee, that's a great question. Um, um, and that it really is beyond my ability to answer that as well. Um, I'm
An,
not
a-
sure. I'm not sure that that's autism, um, because most autistic kids are not that imaginative. But I think that that is a question really for a pediatrician or a
Clinical,
psychologist.
a clinician. Yeah. Another question we have is, can you please explain the difference between autism and Asperger's?
Um, Asperger's is often related to autism, but they have some differences in terms of symptomology. And I don't have my notes in front of me that help me understand the difference. So my apologies, but I'm not prepared to answer that one.
No worries. Another question. Probably these questions are a little bit more geared towards a clinician. Just a reminder, we are linguists after all. We're trying to learn about autism through language. Another question would be, can kids with autism move between levels throughout their development?
Yes, I can answer that one. Yes. And I'm actually going to discuss that a little bit later on. But yes, the short answer, and so this is the spoiler, but it has been shown that through therapies, children can move like from level 3 to level 2 or from level 2 to level 1. Maybe not in all areas, but in some areas.
And another question would be how to set up the eyes contact with people from different cultures. We're considering this is disrespectful behavior.
I think that that is a cultural intervention that needs to be made. That when asking that question, you might ask for a timeout or the opportunity to make the cultural intervention that in that particular culture, it is considered impolite to make direct eye contact, just so the clinician has the opportunity to put that information into the mix and can then start to ask questions about, well, what kinds of eye contact are acceptable? In what context would eye contact be acceptable?
Right. One of our participants is asking if you have any information about autism in Vietnamese or where to find trustworthy information on autism in Vietnamese in general.
He,
Hard one.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's I'm really grateful for all of these questions that I can't answer because it shows, um, high levels of interaction and deep interest in this topic area. So the only thing I can say is that the research for this is not, the symptomologies that we've been discussing is not just based on research done in the US. Most of it is based on research that's done in Western cultures, but a lot of it has some worldwide um, basis as well. So it's not just limited to Indo-European languages. Um, my best suggestion would be for Vietnamese, as a Vietnamese speaker, to do your search in Vietnamese on autism. So instead of doing, typing into Google in English autism, type it in Vietnamese on a Vietnamese server and see what happens.
Right. If you still have a moment, one of the questions would be more boys than girls. Is that still good info?
It still is good info. It still is good info. Um, yeah. So I mean, there's some conditions which are linked to gender. Um, and probably I want to say XY chromosomes rather than anything else at this point. Uh, for example, Rett syndrome occurs more frequently in girls, and it's girls with Rett syndrome who end up being autistic. I mean, a large percentage of autistic girls also have Rett syndrome. So, but I mean, there's so much about this that is genetic that we really don't understand.
Mhm. I think before we move on, I'm gonna read one more question because I think this is important for us as interpreters. An anonymous attendee said, as a father with a child with autism and interpreter, I want to keep an open mind to all choices for her well-being. If a parent asks about Tylenol during pregnancy and the relation with autism, how should we relay that to providers? Should we as interpreters advocate for parents not to be discouraged to keep reaching for a cure?
Um, the question about Tylenol and autism should be fielded through the provider, through the clinician. I mean, you can certainly you can read about it as an interpreter and be ready to say all of these studies show that this is not true. Um, if there's a clinician who is saying stay off of Tylenol because it can create more problems for autistics, uh, that might be something that you have to think through in terms of the ethics of the profession, because we do not give medical advice, nor do we offer opinions in the session. As you're going out the door, it may be appropriate to say, with all due respect to the clinician, I have heard other information. But whatever we do, we can't we can't disrespect the clinicians. And any questions like that should be fielded through the professionals.
Right, that was my point. My point is, as interpreters, we do not interject with our bias, our politics, or anything. We are there to interpret, and that is pretty much it. And you should always check your code of ethics. Correct me if I'm wrong, Miss Catherine, but always refer to your code of ethics as interpreters when you have a question like that or a dilemma like that.
Yep, exactly. That might be good if you have a group of people with whom you can have confidential debriefs. Would be a good one to bat around. But again, sometimes, when I've heard things that clinicians have said that I'm unsure about, again, outside of the session, I might take the time to ask the question to find out the reason why somebody gave that particular piece of information. Um, so I think it can be done well, but it should never be done in the actual interpreting context.
Thank you. Thank you. That was important for us to know. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so moving on to the next section, which is bilingualism and autism. Going to talk about start off by talking about concerns that I have heard from parents and providers, and then move on to the realities of bilingualism for autistics. So here's the first one. It's again, 25% of ASC children grow up in a bilingual environment. So there's really nothing more. I mean, this is just a reality. I think that in the US, even though there are more immigrants and there are more providers who are bilingual, usually from other countries, we're still a really deep-rooted monolingual kind of culture. So I think sometimes, again, for the providers, it's more difficult for them to understand bilingualism. But this particular statistic is based on a bunch of official resources, and it just is. The reality is that people can be bilingual and still be autistic and still be communicative. So the concerns of the parents and the providers basically kind of fall into, excuse me, into these kinds of these three particular areas: the confusing the child, further delay language development, or delay academic development. Now, some providers that I have worked with have started off kind of thinking along these sorts of lines. And this actually almost goes back to the question, Leona, that we just talked about. Um, but again, it's been the kind of situation where, because I've worked with these providers for a long period of time, I'm able to enter into a dialogue again outside of the interpreted context to talk about these. But again, my experience is the majority of the providers, at least now, do not have any do not hold the idea that their children will be confused or there will be any kinds of delays. Um, the the um, the parents are the ones who seem to have the most concern about this. Um, but again, that is, again, the parents may be coming from backgrounds where ideas of bilingualism are confused anyway. So many parents have asked the provider, should I continue to speak, because I'm a Spanish interpreter, should I continue to speak Spanish to my child? And again, the spoiler alert is yes. All right. The reasons for these concerns is, again, because many autistics do have the delay. And again, these sorts of things that are going on. So while number one is true, it is not the whole picture. All right. And again, because we've had a previous spoiler alert that children can move from level 3 to level 2, from level 2 to level 1. Again, just because there's a delay does not mean that nothing is going to happen. For number two, when I was working in Guatemala, it was not uncommon to hear among educators that languages take up room in the brain. So again, that's one of the reasons why Spanish-speaking educators would tell Mayan children not to speak the Mayan languages because they needed to not take up the room in their brain so they can learn reading, math, social sciences, all that kind of stuff. And this is not the only culture. Mayan culture is not the only culture where there was some confusion about how it is that languages, more than one language, can work in the brain. But again, there are mistaken ideas about bilingualism, and that is one of the reasons behind some of these concerns. The third one is, again, English as in the US is perceived as the most prestigious and the most useful language. And I will be referring to English because I am in the US and I'm thinking about made this presentation for a US audience. My apologies to those of you who are not here. But it's not uncommon in other countries for there to be a prestige language as well. So again, in Guatemala, Spanish is the prestige language. And again, the idea would be, should my child not speak a Mayan language because they have to be able to work in the wider community? Again, that goes kind of back to the mistaken ideas about bilingual language acquisition. The fourth thing is that monolingual providers, when they're doing the evaluations or the testings, may not recognize um, what's happening in the non-English language, and so may score a child lower on certain issues than they would have if they understood what was going on. So if they don't count valid utterances, then a child will end up being represented as having more of a delay than they really do have. So they may not recognize other developmental signals from the non-English language, the non-English culture. So again, I think that some of these ideas are coming again because there have not been standardized testings or evaluations that take into account other languages, and a lot of evaluations are done based on English. And when you have an interpreter present during this kind of evaluation, that's one of those places where it may be up to the interpreter to give a heads up about what's going on with the non-English language. Again, going back to the American Speech Language Hearing Association, please notice what's going on in that bolded blueprint. two language approaches have been found to provide more accurate reflection of a bilingual speaker's proficiency than single language assessments. So there is increased recognition of the importance of measuring both languages, although the emphasis from this quote is mine. This guideline has serious implications for interpreters, and we're going to keep seeing that as we go along. Ooh, look at how far behind I am. Okay, so here we go. Research on, these are the research results on autistic bilinguals. Again, please take just a second to look, if at nothing else, at the bolded information. Okay, the bolded information. So the important thing here is that there is no adverse effect. There is no additional impairment. Autistic bilinguals function on a par with monolingual autistic peers. There are potential negative consequences for not acquiring the non-English language in terms of socialization and family cohesion. You can also have negative consequences for the acquisition of English if you do not also support the acquisition of the family language. And again, just to point this out for just to be thorough, you do not have to stop at thinking about bilinguals. You can also have trilingual, quadrilingual. You can have multilingual autistics. We actually this is a reality. So you're not really focusing as second language learning as a way to improve language development, but it is a kind of thing that has happened. Research is less robust than it should be, but there is agreement on the points presented here and on the next slide. So again, in terms of not of parents asking, should I just speak English to my child, my autistic child? The answer should be no, because if the child does not hear, well, let me back that up just a little bit. If the parents are not fluent in English, what they are going to do is they are going to actually create more problems in language acquisition for their child than if they keep speaking the language that they are fluent and proficient in. Okay, I think that's all we're going to do with that one. And again, with this is again, notice again the bolded information on here. Okay, so again, this is all research on autistic bilinguals. This is not generalized language acquisition research. This is on autistic bilinguals. So the encouraging bilingualism have benefits for language development, positive family dynamics, social interaction, and so achievement in larger society. The degree and benefit is related somewhat to autistic level. So if you're starting at a level 3, you don't necessarily expect the child to be bilingual in the bilingualism to move them into necessarily another area, but it could. All right, there is no real evidence that bilingualism per se will move someone from a level 3 to level 2 or level 1, but within the level of autism you do see progress. And again, it's basically one of the things that is the most important in terms of moving from level to level is therapy. And consistent therapy that happens in the home as well as in the therapy sessions. And when I say in the home, meaning that the parents know how they can help their child advance. All right, so basically, this is the summary of this section. Again, people have concerns. 25% of autistics worldwide are bilingual. While the research is sparse, it's overwhelming that there is no negative effect of being it. And again, this last one about the advantages is in terms of being a bilingual can have advantages for autistic kids. And notice that last point in the light green at the bottom, that adults with ASC rated their social life as more satisfactory than their monolingual peers. And again, this comes out of an impressive study of a survey that included 98 bilingual autistic adults and 110 monolingual adults. So this is no small study. This is a very significant study. So this idea that they were they found their lives more satisfactory than their monolingual peers is really important. Okay, before I move on to interpreting in the nitty gritty of this, are there any questions? Let's just take two or three if there are.
All right. I think one of the questions, Catherine, as in a patient who is in an environment with three languages, native, English, and Spanish, how would this affect diagnosis, knowing that communication is a major factor?
You're going to have two interpreters, unless you happen to have an interpreter who speaks both like the native language and Spanish and is culturally competent. So again, it's going to go to the back to the I mean, I'm going to get into this a little bit more because the parent should be brought in as well. We should never sideline the parent as part of this, but again, it's one of those kinds of things that let me answer this as we go through. How's that?
Go ahead. Yes, I think we have the time and we're going to focus on your answers while we present. Another one, I'm going to try to skip the clinical questions just because I don't think we're ready for those. Um, so, how can we support or be empathetic with families that are afraid of the stigma of having a child or more with autism?
I think being professional is the most important kind of thing, and um, again, not to be again because autistic behavior can be very disruptive and in some cases can be threatening. Again, never to kind of let a personal reaction to the situation um, get in the way of being a professional. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yes. There's so much we could talk about on that topic. I'm sure you can agree. I will go on with one more question. Is interpretation and societal treatment of autism different or better in Western Europe? Are there best practices that they pioneered? Are there best practices that they pioneered? I'm assuming.
I really don't have a lot of information on that. I kind of built my network in Europe a little bit on this topic, but most of the people I knew didn't really work with autistics that much. Um, uh, as an example of what I think that I think that in Europe there's been a lot of the same stigma. I don't know if people watch public broadcasting television or not, but there is a program called Astrid, which is a police procedural. And the two main characters are, this takes place in France. It's in French, um, uh, but it's really wonderful because there's a police detective and who works with an autistic woman in solving crimes. And but the thing that's really great is the way that they represent autism in France at that time, and also goes through somewhat of the early history of Astrid, who's the autistic um, adult, and she reflects on her experiences as a child, which seem to me, from what I've been able to find out, are very realistic for what was happening in France. So again, I'm not really sure. I don't really have the information on different kinds of strategies for autism in Europe. That would be another really good research question.
And again, we must stay curious. We must do our own research. Just make sure it's in the medical journals. It is in places that are um, strategically thought for medical and clinician study. All right, go on, Catherine. Sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you. All right, here we go. This is the fun part. Ah, what happened? Can't hit the right button. Okay, so all right. So again, these are the areas that we're going to try and cover really quickly here because time's chugging along. Um, and come on. All right. So in terms of the major areas of concerns for providers, um, this information is coming mostly from the providers and occasionally parents as well as from research. So the first one, I think, at least in the US, is in reference to the fact that we have shifting populations of people who need language access services, and for new immigrant groups or immigrant groups that have fewer speakers in a particular geographical area, we all know that it is sometimes very difficult to find a qualified interpreter, but that is also a concern for the providers. The second one I found to be very interesting, that the language service agencies are not passing along background information to the interpreters. So I show up and in my pre-session I say, is there anything I should know? And the provider will say, well, didn't they tell you? And I have to go, no, they didn't. So again, there's part of that is, I think, is maybe not necessarily the problem of the language service agency, because as I understand it, a lot of locations that need language services actually have their um, medical insurance companies that the families work with, asked to arrange to have an interpreter sent. So whether it is I work at a place called ChildServe quite often. They have to do their requests through the Medicaid insurance companies. And then the Medicaid insurance companies will contact a language access provider who will then ask me to go meet somebody there. But again, somewhere along that line, information gets lost. So I think that one of the things that's going to be important about this is to think about making sure that you have time to do in your introduction or pre-session to say, is there anything I should know? The third one is something that happens in almost any situation, but providers are always concerned that information is not being accurately transmitted. So that first one is the lack of transparency. So again, that would be the kind of situation where there are multiple exchanges between the LEP and the interpreter in answer to a question, and then the interpreter gives a very short answer to the provider, and the provider has no idea what those other exchanges are about. The second one is more in reference to what's actually happening is actually happening in what a child actually says. So if like say in a situation where an educational situation where the therapist is saying, like, trying to get a child to answer the question, what is this? And the this is a shoe. And again, in my where I'm coming from, the child may say pato, and the interpreter will say zapato, because the word in Spanish is zapato. But that's not what the child said. The child said pato, because now that's, again, depending on who this is like, if unfortunately for Spanish speakers, there are a lot of people who studied Spanish in school at some point in time and may recognize pato as meaning duck. So they're actually thinking this child doesn't recognize that this is a shoe. They're thinking it's a duck. So in that sense, by saying zapato, at least it registers with the provider that the child recognizes what the object actually is. But if the provider is interested in the utterance pattern of the child, then saying zapato makes the child sound more fluent than the child actually is. Yeah, so it gets very complicated in this sort of thing. Now, for those of you who are in who deal with Spanish, I'm just going to give you this little tidbit in case you haven't already recognized it. It is not uncommon. Well, in fact, in language acquisition, normal language acquisition for Spanish, the rule tends to be that children will, on long words, will start from the stress syllable and go to the end. So zapato, the pa part is where the stress is. So the child will say pato like when they're starting to speak. So like when they're like 2, they might be 2 to 3 years old. But by the time they're 3.5 years old, they'll start adding the zapato in, and it's natural. Okay, so that does not dropping that initial syllable does not indicate a delay in language acquisition. It indicates the normal process of language acquisition in Spanish. Now, again, the problem though is that if the interpreter is not is refining the child's utterance, then the provider does not really know what's going on. Now, this example was one that can be normative, but there are other ones which are not normative, and that would make up, again, as much of a problem for diagnosis as or understanding the situation as possible could be. And again, 3 and 4 can be related to the if the provider's unsure that the interpreter understands the point of the kinds of activities that are being done in any given session. All right. Now, then again, what we're looking at here, the provider concerns may stem also from not having a solid understanding of the profession of interpreting. And this context requires the interpreter to make ethical decisions rapidly and perhaps in ways in which we haven't had to face before. So the whole National Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice apply, but I'm only focusing on these 3 particular areas right at the moment, again, mostly from lack of time. All right, so again, the role boundaries or scope of practice, if you prefer that way of phrasing it. Again, we have, as interpreters, we have special insight into the non-English language. So understanding of the autistic child's level and progress depends on all utterance data, regardless of the language. And who's going to know what or how well the child is communicating unless it is the interpreter or the parent? And the parent may not know how to jump in with comments during a session. Because interpreters are also part of the treating team, therefore, we need to be ready to draw attention to pertinent data or to draw parents into the discussion. And we're going to look at this more below. We're all familiar with the idea of cultural awareness and cultural interventions, but in autism, again, parents may not think it's polite to offer an opinion to a professional and may not be able to objectify or describe what they hear from their children. So this, again, may lead to kind of linguistic interventions on the part, and we'll get more on that in a bit. The third one, again, interpreters render all messages accurately and completely. And again, if the autistic is articulating something that may be up to the parent or the interpreter to recognize it is a piece of actual language, like instead of just like making like laughing or giving a sound of distress or frustration. So, for example, a therapist often asks mom if the mothers have heard any new sounds since the last visit. On one occasion, the mom said no, but during the session, the child started to say titi when looking at a picture of a cup. I suggested that the mom that might mean something, so I had to do an intervention there. And mom said that the child had started to say that when she wanted her bottle, which in Spanish could also be teta. So titi, teta are not that far apart, and could be that the child is actually recognizing that she wants to have something to drink. All right, so, and by being able to bring that particular point out, the speech language pathologist was able to be more aware of that particular thing and was able to help mom figure out strategies to figure out if that was something that was more random or actually had more meaning, and so indicated an advance in language development. Again, if there's any kind of questions, you've got to be transparent about things. One of the ones that I sometimes have trouble with is that um, educators and speech language therapists often try to focus on like your turn, my turn. So the I you dynamic that goes on there. Now, as an interpreter, when the provider says my turn and I say in Spanish or whatever language, my turn, then that can make the child look at me rather than look at the provider who wants to have the child's attention. So that's one of those kinds of things where it's important to be transparent and to figure out in that particular context what is going to work the best for accomplishing the goals that are at hand. All right. So again, there's some cultural considerations that are in there. And part of this is for the parents, how familiar is the parent with written language? Again, not every immigrant to the US has issues with literacy, but a lot of people do. Many languages do not have widely known written forms of their particular language. And a lot of parents are not familiar with grammatical constructs. That's also true for English speaking parents who would be at a loss to know what kind of, if their child is speaking grammatically or not. And again, on the other side, the providers always seem to presuppose high levels of literacy and grammatical knowledge. So again, this is also they work out of established frameworks and routines, which again, if we don't as interpreters understand what's going on, we aren't going to be able to help. And baby talk is an issue in and of itself. So this is one of those kinds of things which is a lot of fun to think about. So again, uh, in this Kaluli group of Papua New Guinea, parents don't speak to their children until they're about a year old, but they still have grow up in a rich verbal environment. Oddly enough, baby talk may have a negative effect on autistics. Again, because baby talk, at least in many Western cultures, it has like higher pitches or slow tempos of speech. So that could have the opposite effect for kids with neurodevelopmental disorders. Um, the and that may be something to think about um, when talking with the parents about how they actually communicate with the kids as well. So baby talk is just, it's so much fun. Now, I was going to ask if people could give examples of baby talk, but we're running out of time, so off we go. All right, so in terms of what's going on here, um, language is not just the medium of communication for assessment or treatment, it is the focus of assessment and treatment. And the language produced by the autistic person is the basis of diagnosis or disorders. So this again is, if nothing else, one of the things I would like for you to come away with is a sense of the need for heightened metalinguistic fluency. All right, so metalinguistic refers to being able to step outside of just what we normatively consider language and talk about, like in that example of zapato, dropping the initial the syllable before the stressed syllable. Are we aware of how the languages work? All right, so this is really one of the things that I challenge us all to do, is to remember that language can be the focus of assessment or treatment, not just the medium for assessment and treatment. There you go. I knew there was something there. Metalinguistic fluence, awareness. So this is the kind of thing that we need to be able to do with this. Again, remember the OSHA statement that two language approaches have been found to provide a more accurate reflection of bilingual speakers' proficiency than single language assessments. We also have to remember that providers doing the evaluations and therapies do not necessarily speak the client's language, or we wouldn't necessarily be there. And again, providers are often so we're lacking in confidence when providing services because they don't know how good the information that they're going to get from the interpreters will be. Okay, so here we go. When we're talking about metalinguistic awareness, part of that includes things like being aware of things like phonetics and phonology. Now, phonetics is the production of sound. Phonology is how those sounds kind of merge together. This is a crash course in articulatory phonetics. So it's the mechanics of sound production. And I'm going to be focusing mostly on consonants, not on vowels. So what we do is we look at the position of the mouth, or where in the mouth, the position in the mouth, sorry. So, whether you're looking at the lips, you're looking at the teeth, you're looking at the tongue, is it in the front, is it in the back? You're looking at the vocal cords, the glottis, are they vibrating, or are they not vibrating? We're looking at how much air is, how the flow of air, where the airflow starts. Does it start from the lung? Does it start from the trachea? Does it start from the pharynx? So again, these are the kinds of things that we think about. Now, I'm just going to do this very quickly, and I just want you to try to repeat after me, because I'm going to start with I'm going to give us moving from the front of the mouth to the back of the mouth, and just repeat as much as you can. All right, so pa, ba, ta, da, ga, ga, ba, va, fa, va, sa, za, sha, ja, ha, ha, cha, ja, ma, na, nga, la, ra, wa, ya. So feeling that all of those where they are occurring in your mouth, and how much friction there is, or if the air is completely stopped. So again, these are the kinds of things that, again, a speech therapist will be looking for. And again, in relationship to English phonology, because not all the sounds occur in every language, right? So again, different languages do have different sounds. So inventories, which would takes us into that idea of phonology. So they have what I'm calling K-like sounds, where the air is completely stopped at the point of articulation, which is back in the mouth. Now in English, we have this K-like sound is going to be school, cool, kill. Now, every last one of those K-like sounds is actually pronounced slightly differently. School, there is, let me start with cool. Cool, there's actually a little puff of air after the K-like sound. That's called aspiration. School, that puffy of air disappears because it's one of the features in rules in English that after an S, you lose the aspiration. And then if you say the word kill, the word cool, the tongue is further back in the mouth. Kill, the K sound is made further in the front, as opposed to kill, where you have the contrast between ki, which means day, and ki, which means meat. So again, the aspiration becomes contrastive. In Irish, you've got ku, and then you have kais. Okay, so again, the position is different, is contrastive in Irish, and then in Pokemon, you get the sound like kook for squirrel, ak for fire, kek, which has kek, which also has a further one back for black, and then ak. So again, there are contrastive sounds, which in English we would only recognize as being a K-like sound. All right, so again, you get different phonemic inventory. So this is the contrast of the phonemic inventory in between Pokemon and English. Again, we notice that there are some sounds in English which we may not even recognize. So please notice this little red N-like looking thing. This is actually a velar nasal. So it is pronounced, if I were doing it with an A, the letter A after it, it'd be nga, nga, nga. So not na, but nga. So, and we only have this sound kind of syllable final in English, like in the word sing, sing, or thing, or cling, or clang. And we often, because it's written in English as NG, we often think that there's a G at the end of it, but we never really say sing. So we never actually fully stop. We actually just do that with a nasal. So again, these are the kinds of things that are part of metalinguistic awareness. And again, all of these sounds, again, will carry meaning, and we have to be able to recognize what those sorts of meanings are. All right. So why is all of this important? Well, sounds are actually acquired in sequence. Um, so many phonemes tend to be acquired in a similar order cross-linguistically, although the sequence is not entirely uniform. For example, the sound of the letter V, like va, occurs relatively late for English speakers, but earlier for Germanic languages like German, Swedish, and Dutch. Um, so again, a sound not recognized in English may actually reflect progress. So in English, we have a glottal stop like occurs in the sequence uh-oh. So that uh-oh, uh, that is a glottal stop that can be a phoneme in other languages. And so a child producing it, while it may not be recognized in English as a phoneme, at least for like languages like Pokemon, a bunch of African languages, the glottal stop is contrastive and would indicate the child is actually acquiring more sounds. Um, a sound not recognized in English may become the focus of correction. So again, there's a tendency to correct pronunciation. For example, in many dialects of Spanish, B is pronounced using the lips, so it's something like um, more like va than va. So again, that's kind of a moot point. But again, if if a therapist is trying to get a kid to say something like very, and the kid is saying very, then that may not be the kind of thing that they really want to focus on because it may not recognize that they're actually acquiring a phoneme in the source language or the child's first language. And then sound sequences, again, may also create confusion. So those are, again, like I remember being in one therapy session where a child kept saying escool, because again, in Spanish, you do not, the sequence of S, K is not allowed. So they put a vowel in front of it, escool. But what the therapist was hearing was the child saying a school. And so again, that created confusion in terms of what was actually happening. And again, this keeps going on because again, we're just not. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's happening in languages as well. So there's tones, intonation, other kinds of things which are really important. Grammar, phrase structure, all those sorts of things are extremely important. And again, are we as interpreters able to help uh, uh, providers know what's going on with the utterance? Again, we can also have sorts of issues like so difference in how grammar is done. So in English, we have to have what's called a free pronoun. So like those would be like the subject pronouns that you see here. In Spanish, you don't need the free pronouns because they're part of the verb. In Spanish, in Pokemon, the same thing. The subject pronoun is included in the actual verb structure. So if if sorry, if the kid actually says something like lo compré, um, the question would be, do they count that as a 2-word or a 3-word utterance? Because that's again part of what's happening, and how many words in an utterance does a child do? That would be a place where we would have to start talking with the providers as well. How did we get there? Okay, so the challenge, I think, for us is to increase our linguistic knowledge and our ability to communicate it. Um, again, because the therapists need the detailed information. And again, it's not that we're supposed to take over the function of doing this, but again, if we are not able to provide or to help the parent provide this information, then what we get are kind of skewed results. Potential resources for this kind of information. These are all on your bibliography. But again, these are the kinds of ways that you could be able to start working on increasing your own metalinguistic awareness. All right, behavioral considerations, as they say. All right. Again, when we're working with neurotypical children, again, we take into account whether the kid is really bilingual or is English dominant. We often try and establish rapport with the child in a waiting area. And if lots of talking going on at once, we may move to like chukotage so the parent knows what's going on, but not overwhelming for the child. And we use indirect speech when is appropriate. Again, for general characteristics with the kids who are autistic, sorry, these are the kinds of things also that can be something of an issue. So again, not every autistic child and not in every kind of context. But we have to recognize that these are the kinds of ways that children can start to react within the autistic situation. And it's important for the interpreter to be able to recognize things like, where do I position myself? Now, when I start, I usually start sitting on the floor if the provider is sitting on the floor. If the child becomes non-compliant or inattentive or starts to have tantrum, and seems to be focusing more on me, I may shift my position to be closer to the parent and then again shift to chukotage so that again I'm not getting in the way of what's happening with the provider. But again, it's always important to remember to talk with the provider about what's going on and what you think is happening to see what their input is. Doing that. Okay. The main areas for assessment are the kinds of things that we've already talked about. So language, cognition, and physical and occupational sorts of things. So the first area is, of course, where the metalinguistic awareness and descriptive skills are extremely important. And learning can also be part of language assessments. So the cognitive areas can be linked to language delays, as can physical delays, like not being able to control the mouth muscles. So again, these are the kinds of things again that we are always need to be paying attention to. And so for the physical and occupational sorts of things, again, to understand where we need to be in room and able to communicate, knowing communicate for the parents, but also for the providers. Now, again, the kinds of things that can happen with this is that again, I'm sorry, I'm really out of time, so I'm just trying to keep going on here. So again, just as in terms of the assessment, these are the kinds of areas where we find the therapy support. And all of these therapies may be offered and may overlap, especially in early access situations where there may be a team visiting a home or you may have a team in an outpatient kind of context. It's not uncommon to have two or more therapists in outpatient or inpatient or in-home context working with the client. And with young children in level 1 autistic, most therapies are based in play. Actually, with any kid, most therapies are based in play. But if an interpreter is not sure what the point of an activity is, be sure to ask. In the next 3 slides, I'm going to talk about some of the approaches of the areas where we've got behavioral things. So again, these are this is kind of the alphabet soup. So again, these are therapy approaches that you can see help here. I want to focus on this one, the second one, the PECS one. This is often a preferred, is utilized as a preferred item. So like it's an exchange like of a picture of a ball for a ball. So again, if the child is not articulating, is not using vocal communication, in order to get the concept of communication across, the provider may have a picture of the item like a ball and say, give me the ball, and give the picture to the child, and the child has to give the picture to get the actual ball. So again, this may, but we need to be able to ask the providers how they want us to proceed. appropriately. Because if the child responds appropriately, you may not need to be close to the child because the child, again, could be acquiring English at that moment. And the only thing you want to do is be close to the parent so the parent learns the skill that the therapist is demonstrating not only to the child but also to the parent, so the parent can continue with that kind of therapy strategy at home. So again, the kinds of things that are happening is that if again, we've kind of talked about this sort of thing. The interpreter may be the first person to recognize the difference between utterance and sound. And sound production. So again, these are the sorts of things that we are really thinking about. So again, the pivotal response is kind of based on the ABA principles. So response to multiple cues, self-management, and initiation of social interactions. So I've highlighted this down here again to teach the parents how to communicate, how to create communication-rich environments at home, because a child will not advance make progress in any type of therapy if it only happens on a weekly or monthly basis. So if the kid is going to move from level 3 to level 2, they have to have constant um, um, interactions. So again, these are all, again, if the child's on the floor, the interpreter should start on the floor. Um, I, so the speech sound disorders, I've kind of covered that ad nauseum. And if so, again, the idea of in a family language doesn't occur in English, the interpreter can help by describing the place and manner of articulation, so that again, if we need to work on motor control, muscle motor control in the mouth, the therapist knows what's going on. Communication issues are also part of all of the other areas. Physical therapy and occupational therapy, again, these are the kinds of things that, again, talking about can be a challenge. One of the issues in these is often what's called DICEs. So, and a provider may say to the child, is it this one or that one? Now, again, depending on the language and where the interpreter is positioned, if you say this one, it could actually indicate that one, because again, it has to do with the distance of an object from the speaker. So that's, again, one of those kinds of things that you need to work through with the therapist. Um, uh, um, so again, in all of these types of things too, there's a lot of metaphorical use of language, like hop like a bunny, or kick like you're on a bike, or all kinds of those sorts of things. But we have to remember that autistics often do not relate well to metaphorical language. They're very literal. So again, that can be the kind of thing that interpreters have to think about. And again, just even kinds of the terminologies that are used for description of sorts of things that are what we call onomatopoeia, which make it kind of sound. So in English, we've got terms like glug, slurp, pop, plop, squishy, honk. A honk's kind of fun because it can either be the sound that a goose makes or a sound that a car horn makes. So again, it's just we have to be prepared for almost anything. But again, knowing what it is that is behind the use of those terms is really important. One other thing that about this as well is that sometimes again, the interpreter is there to interpret, but again, because of the social challenges, shall we say, for autistic kids, you've got to be ready to kind of go with the flow. I have been sitting on the floor kind of out of the range of what's going on. The provider has been rolling a ball to the child and wants the child to roll the ball back to the therapist, and the child has rolled the ball to me. And so I roll it back to the child, and hope the child will roll it back to the therapist, but starts to roll it back to me. So I roll it to the therapist, who rolls it to the child, who rolls it back to me. I look at the therapist and say, what do you want to do? And she says, just go with it. So again, but it's that thing is, I want the therapist to be kind of the focus, but I have to recognize that if the child is actually interacting with me, for an autistic child, that's moving a step forward. In eating therapy, which if you haven't worked with that, this is a lot of fun, is trying to get children who are having trouble eating, either because they don't like textures or for some other reason. They have to have, they're trying, therapists are working with them to get the eat more kind of solid food. Part of that is playing with food, like, stick your hands in the applesauce and just mush it around. And at one point, a therapist was asking a child to do that. The child was refusing. The therapist started to talk to the mom about the purpose of that particular activity. The child walks over to me, sits in my lap with her bowl of applesauce, and starts squishing it all over herself, all over me. And I look at the therapist and say, what would you like me to do? And she just says, go with it. So again, I do not want to get in the way of what's happening with this, but again, that's kind of pushing the boundaries of what we think we're doing within a particular session. So again, so we really need to know the code of ethics and the standards of practice. So this is challenging for everyone. Interpreters always facilitate communication with the primary participants that don't share the same language. With autistics, our skill levels must include being able to relate to the provider's information they may expect to be able to see for themselves if it were in English. So again, one of the things is understand what's going on, and be flexible for the unexpected. Are there questions at this point?
So, first of all, Catherine, what an incredible session. The chat is really overflowing with thank yous and questions. Um, I just meant to say that the practical strategies you've shared for autism related settings, whether it's a pediatric clinic, an IEP meeting, or a therapy session, have given us real tools to serve these families with deeper understanding and empathy, right? So, now for questions. We have a few questions. I don't know how much time we're going to have when it comes to how many questions we're going to be able to answer, but there is one that we're all curious. Where did you interpret in Guatemala, Catherine?
Oh, uh, various places. A lot in San Luis Olotepeque in the department of Jalapa, también in I shift into Spanish, also in Chichicastenango, in a little bit in Solula and Patsun. So those would be Quiche, Cachiquel, and Popomam.
These are wonderful
And
places. I have never been, but
yeah,
I know people who come from
yeah,
there.
some
Mhm.
some educational, a lot of a fair bit of medical, some interesting legal experiences, and um, actually was the designated interpreter for a retreat of the Episcopal clergy of Guatemala. That was interesting.
Wow, so much diversity in your
Yeah.
interpreting and experience. So, one more question. In the example of zapato, are you saying that when we as interpreters render our interpretation, we need to adapt the utterance to the target language?
Um, that's going to be really tricky, to be honest with you, because again, the rules are going to be different. So
Mhm.
again, in a pre-session or an introductory session, if you have time, you can ask, you can work with the provider about how they want to deal with such strategies. I'll tell you that the one about IU, every single provider I've asked that question of, when you say your turn, my turn, what do you want me to do about that? And explain again, because if I say my turn, they'll look at me rather than looking at you. If I say her turn, it's not, it's getting out of the way of that I, you kind of thing. And most people have said, I never even thought about that.
Mhm.
I think it's, again, it's the kind of thing that we can, we can ask those questions and see what people want to do. Some people have said, I want you to take a turn so that we can get the you um, focus on those pronoun, the meanings of those particular pronouns. I have also sat behind the provider and have whispered to the provider how to say it in Spanish, and then the provider has done it in Spanish. So I think there are different strategies for dealing with the particular situations. One thing I kind of skipped over because I was running out of time is that in some assessments, they are timed and the number of prompts you can give are very restricted. So there are some that you can only give one prompt. So again, I have to ask the provider, if I repeat it in Spanish, that gives a double prompt. What do you want to do about that? And then let the provider kind of think through the best way of dealing with it.
Mhm. Those are strategies that we acquire, by the way, as we go. The more we interpret in these situations, there is no such thing as a perfect interpreter. Even professional interpreters struggle at moments and time. So we just have to keep an open minded, as you said, roll with the provider. Sometimes it's the safest thing, just ask questions and try not to get out of your role unless um, you are put in that situation without your will. Another question, very
Could
related.
I just,
Go ahead.
I would like to kind of challenge us to think about what our role is, though,
Mhm.
in these situations, because again, um, while I really advocate for bringing the parent in, the parent may not have any more metalinguistic awareness than any given interpreter at any point in time. So again, I think it's a challenge to us to be able to be professional about the kinds of information that we provide, but that being part of our role as well.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
go ahead.
No, we needed to know that. And one last question, since we are at 1:11 right now. One of the participants is asking, can we ask the child's mom about a word if the child used a baby talk word or something like that? Can we clarify with the parents what a specific word
Oh,
means?
yeah, very, very definitely. And I may have glossed over that too
Mhm.
rapidly, but if you can bring the parent into the discussion, I think that's rather than just it being. I mean, certainly you have to be transparent. Like with that TT one, I was transparent with the mom, saying I'm going to ask. I want to ask you. I was with the provider first. I want to ask mom about this word, and then I brought mom into the conversation as well. So again, I think that the more that the parents are involved in these discussions, the better off they are.
Thank you. And always critical thinking, always common sense, always ask questions. Do not assume. It's very important. Thank you so much, Catherine. Um, Quick reminder about our 4 opportunities. Don't forget, all links are in the chat. First of all, free educational interpreter online primer. It's 30 minutes long at zero cost. Our Black Friday is here, 20% of all print books at Cross Cultural Communications. We have an upcoming course, glossary building workshop. You can save $30 by November 25th. The course is December 9th and 11th from 6 to 8 p.m. And don't forget to join our WhatsApp community. Scan the QR code in the chat to join the Cross Cultural Interpreter Exchange today. And thank you all for being here from every time zone and language. You showed up, engaged, and asked brilliant questions. Catherine, thank you for your wisdom and passion. And to everyone, keep doing the vital work you do. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.